Law school. It's an investment in your future. But like all investments, without the right advice, it can lead to disaster. That's where Pre-Law Pro comes in. Whether you're exploring the law, navigating the admissions process, or need personalized career guidance, at Pre-Law Pro, we've got your back. Don't gamble on your future. Invest in it. Get started today at prelawpro.com.
How can I make myself more competitive?
How do I build my network?
I want my career to go to the next level, but I don't really know where to start.
I hate the job I am in. What else can I do?
I want to work in healthcare, but I don't want to be a doctor.
I need connections in a new industry. Where should I start?
Whether you're a college student trying to decide on a career path, a young professional trying to develop their career, or maybe you're in the mid to late stages of your own professional journey and you're looking for a new challenge, or maybe you're facing an unexpected job search. Whoever you are, wherever you are, welcome to the Professionists podcast. And together, let's find your fit. Welcome to another episode of the Professionists podcast. We've got an interesting and I think quite exciting interview today. We're going to be talking with Wes Bearden of Bearden Investigations, and we're going to explore the career path of a private investigator. Now, there are a number of ways to get into this particular career, and we're going to talk about that in a little bit more detail in our interview. But there isn't actually a formal education requirement. They're generally going to want you to have at least a high school diploma, and there are certainly plenty of people who have their bachelor's degrees, especially as we explore in the interview the increasing use of technology, especially when it comes to computers and cell phones. But we also see quite a few lawyers going down that path, and the reason being that as lawyers they have attorney-client privilege. So that makes having a lawyer investigator quite advantageous. If you look at median pay nationally, it's $53,000 per year. Now, that's a median, so there are absolutely people making a lot more than that. A lot of it's going to depend on where you work, the kind of work that you do, and there's a lot of variability there. We're going to talk a little bit in the interview about what the lifestyle of an investigator is like. We're going to talk about the changing face of the business and what to expect in the years to come. I hope you'll enjoy it. It was a pleasure to talk with Wes, and I think you'll find it quite informative as you explore all of the careers that are out there that we don't hear about at careers fairs and that our guidance counsellors don't talk to us about in high school. So I hope it's useful, and I look forward to sharing another interview with you now. Thanks. Well, welcome back to another episode of the Professionists podcast. This week it's a cross, I guess, between entrepreneurship and a James Bond type enterprise. We have with us Wes Bearden, who is the CEO of Bearden Investigations. Wes, thanks for joining us.
Well, thank you. I'm not sure, James Bond or Kojak's. I'm not sure. I'm not sure James Bond is necessarily applicable to all of us in the office. We'd like to think that, but maybe not so much.
Well, I think too, generationally, I know growing up, private detectives were a thing that was featured on television and in movies a lot more than I feel like it is today.
Yeah, we were just talking about this. Actually, I was just bringing this up at a convention that, our image has changed so much, but yeah, during the 70s and 80s, you had those shows. They were all 30-minute shows where the case was solved in 30 minutes, which is always great. I mean,
yeah.
And, they always caught the bad guy and always represented the good guy. And those are interesting shows. And we just don't have that many of them right now, to be honest with you. And, if you look on TV and you find those old ones, the other night I was watching Heart to Heart. And I got to tell you, they're great plot scripts. You know what I mean? They were wonderful shows. We don't have that type of TV anymore unless you're on Netflix or something. So,
well, it's the old thing of, they could speed and do all these traffic infringements. They would never get pulled over. There were no concerns about illegal wiretapping or anything. They just found the bad guy and wrapped it all up in 30 minutes.
That's right. That's right.
I'd like to use an example of a TV show that is on Amazon Prime called Bosch. And it's based on a Michael Connolly character. And it's basically one crime that is resolved over the course of an extended period and over the course of 10 episodes.
Mm-hmm.
And that feels much more realistic than what you're talking about, where everything gets neatly wrapped up in a bow in a 30 to 45-minute window. And I'm gathering that's kind of what your life is like in investigations, is things kind of develop over time. It's not necessarily I guess rarely is it quick.
Oh, yeah. I mean, look at what just happened the other day with Bill Cosby and his case.
Yeah.
Who thought we would be here? There were some commenters who were saying, well, maybe that was the wrong move. But that's most cases. Most cases start and, there's a period of investigation. There's a period of litigation. You may go to a decision maker, may get appealed, go back over. The public gets their way in, if you will. But, nothing resolves quickly. It's not meant to really resolve quickly in our system. And so it can be years. And, I'll work on a case and I won't hear from it for a few years. And it comes back to me, we got to do something else, or whatnot. So I think for lawyers and people in the courthouse, investigators, that's pretty commonplace, that these things go on for a while and you never really know. And it's kind of tough. I mean, sometimes you have some definite wins, but it's hard sometimes to know whether or not you have wins or losses sometimes until, it's all over with. So,
yeah. Well, I do want to jump into the different career paths and the lifestyle and the ups and downs of the investigations world. But tell us a little bit how you got started, because your dad was a former intelligence officer and kind of started his own investigations agency, but you ended up actually going to law school yourself.
Yeah.
Did you plan on being a lawyer?
So, I'm in a second generation company, and my dad, who's now been deceased for many years, had worked for the Central Intelligence Agency back in the 70s. Didn't really care to work for the government too much. Did it for a while and realized that maybe was not what he really wanted to do. And so he left and he kind of stumbled into it. I mean, he wound up getting some clients after he left and some pretty good high profile cases. And one thing led to another and it really developed into a career. And so I grew up in this business. I was, working like most family businesses. When you're 15, 16, 17 years old, that's what you know. And I love it. It is, to me, it's a hobby as much as it is a business. I don't play golf. This is what I love to do. I do it, and we'll talk about it, I'm sure, 24 hours a day almost. Even when I'm sleeping, I'm thinking about it. But then I got out and I worked my way through college, went to law school. And I mean, I love to practice law. I love being in a courtroom. If you're a lawyer now, you're listening to this, that getting to a courtroom sometimes or to a jury trial now, it's almost an act of God. I mean, we've got somebody out before you really get to try your case. But
I mean, even pre-COVID, that was the case, right?
Oh, yeah. We've placed so much emphasis on mediation and arbitration.
Yeah.
But at any rate, I went to law school really to be a better investigator. And my investigation agency looks a lot like a law firm when you probably walk into it and the way it operates and acts and everything. But that's really what I do. And so that's how I came to occupy the space I have. And if you look at, I still do practice in some cases and I'm co-counsel in a lot of cases. But if you really look at what I do, everything's really based around the investigation scheme, basically. And it's what I enjoy.
It seems to be that there are quite a few lawyers who actually end up in investigations. For those who aren't familiar with the reasons for that, can you help us understand why it might be beneficial for a lawyer to actually be the investigator in a case?
Sure. Well, I think you've got two types of tracks, basically. If we go to any big firm in America right now, big law firm, downtown tower where they're wearing the silk stockings and the, nice suits, there's usually a guy there that is basically what I call the investigative lawyer. A lot of times he's a district attorney or an ex-U.S. attorney of some sort. And he's doing internal type investigations. And that kind of occupies his space, basically. There are a handful of guys who've really kind of come where they really are doing a lot more investigations. And there are a handful of lawyers, but, when I first really started doing what I did, I don't know that there were that many. Now I think there's a few dozen that are really practicing across the U.S. that are lawyers by trade, by education, but are really investigators. I mean, that's really what they do. And then the other thing is that, most people that go in the government, if you're in a federal investigative type role, like whether you're FBI or DEA, a lot of those guys now are becoming lawyers. And, so there are a million FBI agents that are lawyers that were ex-FBI agents or vice versa or went to school during at some point in time. That's how that's all coming together now. And, where they're all falling, it depends, but it's interesting to see how people kind of delve into this career.
So I think it's probably a good thing just to mention here that while going to law school and becoming an investigator is a path that creates them some attorney-client privilege benefits, you don't necessarily have to go to law school in order to be a licensed investigator, right?
No, vast majority aren't.
Yeah.
Right now, we've got from a career perspective, we have a real problem. And part of the problem is that we just don't have a lot of people coming into this business. Part of that is kind of what we started talking about is a Hollywood mentality of it. That's a big part of it. The other part of it is that, starting your own businesses, no matter what kind of business it is incredibly difficult. It's 10 times more difficult than you think. But when you try to start this business, I mean, there's a million ways this could go wrong. You got to get a client. That's sometimes the hardest thing to do. Then you got to know how to treat your client. You got to know how to deal with your client. And it's a pretty complex area. And so we just don't have that many people really coming into the profession right now. And that's kind of a weird thing. And, it's kind of changing a little bit from, where it was in the 70s and 80s and 90s and 2000s. And now we're kind of in this new era that we're all trying to figure out.
Well, and you guys do some really high-tech stuff. It's more than just sitting in a car with a telephoto lens trying to catch some guy running around with someone he's not supposed to.
Right.
I mean, there's you have the capacity now to look at phone records and pull that off and look at software usage and look at internal issues there. So tell us a little bit about what investigators do, because I think, as we've alluded to, we think of probably infidelity and matrimonial cases and workers' compensation.
Yeah.
But there's a lot more that investigators tackle beyond that.
Sure. Yeah, the forensics now, particularly the digital forensics, I mean, everybody has a phone on their hip, and which is now basically a computer. And there's so much information there that it really, takes someone who's pretty skilled and who understands the software that's being involved, that's out there, understands what they can access, what they can't, in all types of relationships, whether it's a household phone, whether it's your kid's phone, whether it's your employee's phone, your partner's phone, all those type of things. So there is quite a bit of that going on. There's quite a bit of the background investigation that we talk about. A lot of people think of background investigation as just plugging your name into a computer system and we get your whole profile. That's far from the truth. I mean, we're a very provincial society. We've got little bitty fiefdoms of courts and police departments and states and counties, municipalities. And so, it's not unusual for a true vetting of somebody, a true dossier, to take weeks to put together. And so,
you're civilians too. You're civilians as well. So you don't have some of the capacity that law enforcement has. So you got to work within that framework as well.
That's right. Now, law enforcement does have some things that are protected, but a lot of what's available out there for law enforcement's out there available for civilians. Can you do as thorough as a check? Well, pretty darn close as the FBI does of your next door neighbor. Probably pretty darn close. You just have to know where to look. And there are books and manuscripts written about how to do that stuff. There are lawyers now. I just did a CLE, Freedom of Information Act, for lawyers on how to use it really to their advantage. The Freedom of Information Act is a huge body of law that allows you to request information on other people and yourself from the government. And learning how to do that is not easy. I mean, it's not a simple process of just mailing a letter. So.
Do you think people are surprised when they realize how much information is out there that can be obtained by someone who knows where to look?
I think there's a little bit of that, yeah. I think they are surprised, but I also think people are realistic too.
Yeah.
That when they disclose certain things to the government, if they get in trouble, it's probably going to come back and haunt them at some point in time. Now, we're doing certain things probably, nowadays that protect some of that. But, is privacy dead? I don't know, but it's floundering, that's for sure. So.
Yeah, it's on dialysis.
Right, exactly.
Help us understand what are some of the different roles within private investigations, because you'll have, desktop investigators who will be in an office and I imagine work fairly regular hours, and they're doing, I guess, some of this work that you talked about, kind of looking through databases. And is that a fair description of desktop investigations? It is.
A lot of places separate that out. In our group, we have some of that separated, but on a lot of our heavy-hitting investigators, we require them to do a little bit of everything. And we kind of want an all-around ball player. We want a guy who can go out and do a surveillance and do an interview. You'll come back and prepare a 1,000-page report on all his different business holdings. And that takes a unique type of person. Is it a 9-to-5 deal? Usually it is, but, I can't tell you how many times I get hired at 3 o'clock on a Friday. And when do we need to know this? Today? But tomorrow you'll be or on Monday morning at 8 a.m. if you come down and meet with us, we'd like to know everything you know. And so, some of these desktop guys work all night and get ready for the next day, or they're field investigators who are out there. Maybe they see something out in the field that's worthwhile. Maybe they see the salesman meeting with, the evil corporation vice president competitor who's buying the secret recipe for Coke. And, they've got to get that information and process it, usually within a matter of hours, so that you have an idea. You've got that intelligence, you got that information. How do you actually use it the next day? I mean, I don't, mean to tell you that we're 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, but, there's a whole group of people that come in our office about 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and they don't go home until past midnight sometimes, most times. And so they're working pretty hot and heavy.
Well, I imagine too the surveillance stuff, if you're following somebody, you don't get to schedule an appointment as to when they're going to be leaving their house and how long they're going to be on the road for. And that's got to make the hours really tricky as well, because you don't get to control your hours, I'm gathering, as much when you're on a surveillance job.
Right. So, we have an idea when we want to watch people generally to see, maybe that's what do they do after hours? Who do they meet with during lunch? Where do they get up and go to work the next morning?
Mm-hmm.
Those type things you have an idea of, and you schedule them. And we have a gentleman in our office, and he's very good at it. Once a week, he sits down and he creates a schedule for about a week or so up. And we don't know what time they get off. Sometimes they get off at 10 o'clock at night, and sometimes they get off at 4 a.m. Sometimes that sucks for them. But those guys are pretty used to that. And they like that. They like getting in the game. They like to see action happen. Nobody wants to go and sit outside of a house till 4 a.m. But if you're following somebody in the nicest restaurant or club in Dallas or New York or something, well, then it changes and people get a little bit excited about that. So, they're not hurting too bad some days. So,
does that make it really hard to have a family life, having that unpredictability?
It can, but I'll say this. We have our busy times and we have our light times. For years, I always tell my guys, of course, if I say this now, I'm almost damning everybody to work on Christmas. But, Christmas for us is a pretty light period of time. And, I don't care who you are. You could be a terrorist. Christmas time, everybody tries to be a good guy at Christmas, even if you're the worst guy. It tends to be a little bit lighter time. So we do have times where it gets out of control. I think it's harder for a single person, in my opinion. And I do because, a lot of our people who are married, who have family life, their spouse knows that they love this. We hire people who like doing this, not just because they want the job. And they know, hey, I'm overwhelmed right now. I'm not going to be home on time. And they get that. And sure, there's some head butts every now and then, but for the most part, the problem with the ones that are the single, particularly the females, it's hard to say to a guy, yeah, I'd like to go out. Thanks for asking me out. I'd like to go out with you on Friday, but, that's only if my boss doesn't call me and if I don't get caught at work. And then, I may go to Saturday and I may have to go out of town. Well, most guys would say, listen, just tell me you don't want me to go out with you. You didn't need to do all that, So it can. And I find that the single individuals, the people who do this, they love it. And sometimes they get addicted to it. And so there are times when I have to walk in and I see the ones that are single that aren't married and say, hey, you need to go home. We don't need you right now. All the problems will be here tomorrow. Go home, get some rest.
Yeah.
Go have a life. So to me, I've always found the single ones have it a little bit more unfairly, in my opinion, unfortunately. So
yeah. Help us understand how someone becomes addicted to this kind of work. How do you actually break into it? Because if you aren't coming to it from, perhaps as a former DA or as a former law enforcement, how do you break into this?
It's very difficult. Getting a license in any state is probably not too terribly difficult. You can go get a license. And really where we're going in the states now is not just with us, but everybody's. We're lowering these licensing requirements quite a bit, for all professions. I think that is been the movement. But the problem is a couple things. First of all, you've got to get a client. And that you've got to get somebody to trust you to do something that's usually very sensitive. Usually it's something that has a lot going on. I mean, every case I have, I always call it an oh my God case. It's oh my God, my family's about to lose my family, my business, my freedom, X millions of dollars. And so when they do that, they're really looking for people that are referrals. And I would tell you that 90-something% of our business is a referral business. It's somebody who knows me, or a lawyer who's heard of another lawyer who used me or something, or whatever. And so that's a tough thing to get into. And so a lot of these investigators, I think, are, the first thing is that they're doing is they're joining many of these state professional associations. That's one of the best things you can do. You can find people to take you up under your wing. I think right now we're going from, in the 90s and the 2000s, we had a lot of one-man, two-man shops that existed out there. Prior to that, in the 80s, we really had some kind of larger agencies that really were doing a lot of work. We're kind of going back to the agency mentality now. So I do think that if you're a young person you have a real interest in it, well, then you probably can find an agency, and they're not going to be, the biggest agency in the country is still going to be a small agency. And, try to talk to them and try to see if you can get in the door. And, what we look for is somebody who's very excited, really wants to work hard, has a good attitude. I mean, that means a lot more to us than really what your past history is, frankly, whether you're law enforcement or and even to your educational background. I'm more concerned about, what is your attitude? What is your work ethic? That type of stuff. So,
is it necessary to have a college degree?
I don't think so. I mean, now we do require it, but I know a lot of places you can get in without it.
Yeah.
And I think that there are most people that have agencies that I know would look at somebody pretty fairly and offset them with whatever experience they might have or what experience they think they get up on the uptick, So, part of a lot of this business is that, when I talked about the guy that calls at 3:00, a lot of times you get a call that you're trying to figure something out that I'll tell you our investigators may have never seen before. The other day we were trying to trace, a young guy in the office was trying to trace shipping vessels throughout the Gulf of Mexico. And he learned everything you can about shipping vessels and what you had to file and when you had to file it and what's the difference between one in Florida versus one in Mexico and what the flag flying is and how do you communicate with them. And he didn't know he was going to learn any of that crap on Monday morning. He learned that at 3:00 on Thursday. We said, we need to know this. Well, when now? So what we're looking for, a lot of people are looking for is people who are just quick. I mean, you've got to be able to jump in the deep end and say, I don't understand this, but I'm going to have to learn it. So, I need to figure this out.
It sounds really varied in that sense. So let's say you're either coming out of college, coming out of high school, or maybe you're in mid to late career and you kind of just really are in need of a change. And investigations is something that appeals to these people for all of the right reasons. What would you suggest they do in terms of getting some education under their belt? Because there's not a degree in criminal investigations, and I know there's probably some courses that your professional associations put on, I'm guessing, but what education should they get before they kind of rock up to an office and say, hey, I'd like to try this out?
Sure, yes. There are a number of national associations that deal with investigation generally. Good idea to join those. Good idea to go to those courses and kind of understand what's being talked about and being discussed. And, a lot of the online discussions, too, that are happening on listservs or chat rooms about, how to do this or that is pretty good. The forensics push right now, we've got a number of forensic certifications. That has been a real big issue now. That's been a real big push. Probably that didn't exist 20 years ago. And so now we have, forensic certifications in mobile phones and tablets and different software companies who are offering that stuff. And that stuff is highly marketable. And it's not cheap to get that stuff either. But that stuff has some real value to you. And learning those is a good idea. We have some national associations that are really a conglomerate of people. One of them is the Certified Fraud Examiners, Association of Certified Fraud Examiners, and American Society of Industrial Security. And those are everybody from security guys to investigators to law enforcement, attorneys. And those are really great resources, too, to look because they offer some very detailed educational programs that make a little bit of sense. And then the final education part of that is here in Texas, we have one called, I think it's through the University of North Texas, and I can't remember their name right now. It's called PDI. I think it's Professional Development Institute. And they offer a course that I think they still do. And it might be a year or so to take that course. And I think you get some benefits from it from a licensing perspective. And that's a pretty good little course to do. A number of colleges have begun to really go after that across the country. So there's a handful that have begun to offer those type of courses. But it's been very rare. And part of the reason is because most of the people that are in there are in criminal justice. And, so those criminal justice courses are always, they tend to be for criminal prosecution. You're right. They're trying to train law enforcement officers or next breed of law enforcement officers. So, yeah, you take that. And when you get out of there, I'm not sure really teaches you much about, our profession at all.
Yeah.
what the police officers are learning. So,
What's the turnover like and what's the average career? Because I could see this being a really exciting career path, but I could also see it being a tough lifestyle in terms of the variability of the hours. Do you see a lot of people who get really excited about it and then they get into it and they're like, this isn't what I thought it was? Like, what's the general turnover of a career look like?
Yeah, I mean, it depends on what they're doing, basically.
Yeah.
And what I mean by that is this. there are a lot of people who get in it and they love it. And whether they love it or hate it, nowadays I can look at them within probably about 60 days, 60, 90 days. I can tell right away. He is swimming in this, or she's swimming in this, or she's not,
Yeah.
And there's a lot of specialization in it. I mean, for instance, there are a lot of investigators that are out there that are doing criminal defense appointments. And so they're appointed by, the request of a criminal defense lawyer for cases from capital murder cases all the way down to felony cases. And they're out there basically, going over the case and what was presented by the police department to the district attorney and so on forth, and making sure that all the I's were dotted and the T's were crossed, and that the defendant, no matter how great a guy or bad a guy he is, it's gotten a fair shake at a trial. And, some of those people, you meet those people and they're not Rockefellers, they're not making tons of money, but they love it. They absolutely love it. And they love the courthouse, they love the people, they love the defense bar, and so they'll stick with it for a long, long time and do it. I think when you get to the agencies, one of the issues I think we see is that, in the agencies, we throw a lot at you. And I do have some burnout, and we have to really work hard at that. And in fact, we kind of got to the point now that we really look at your hours, not just to make sure that you're billing hours to make sure that we can keep the place open, but make sure that you don't have too many hours that you're going to fall down in, 8 months or 2 years or 3 years or 5 years or whatever.
It happens to everyone, doesn't it? Everyone has their point where they just can't do it anymore.
Oh, it does. That's right. And even myself, I have to unplug. And I have a couple times a year that if I don't, it'll get to me. And my wife can tell me when I need to do it because she's the first one that'll poke me in the chest and tell me, get out of here. But you do. You have to get away from it. And it's like anything. Too much of anything's a bad deal. You got to learn to regulate. So,
what's the gender breakup? Is it, I can see how advantageous it would to have investigators of both genders. What does the breakup look like in your experience? Is it fairly male dominated? Is it fairly equal?
Well, there's probably more men now. And a lot of that is likely driven because we have a lot of law enforcement officers, and, most law enforcement or government agents or intelligence agents say that, there's a lot of retirement benefit after about 20 years. So you kind of have to roll the clock back 20 years ago to see, well, who was in 20 years ago and now they're getting out and now they want to do this. So you kind of have to look at that. But, there's a lot more, I think, today, women in it than there ever has been. And that's a great thing. When I first started, we had one or two kind of lady pioneers that were the first to the business as females. But now there's more and more and more. And that's a great thing. I mean, I think the women bring quite a bit to it, and got to have that diversity because, we don't all think alike. We don't all act alike. And it's funny what, some of our female investigators will come up to me and say, well, I think this. And you're right. But we've got 4 guys on the case and they didn't think about that because that's not their priority. But anyways.
What about personal protection? Is that something that falls under the umbrella of a private investigation firm generally does, or is that a fairly specialized skill set?
Well, that's a very interesting question. And the answer to that is that nationwide, it depends on where you were at. If you were in LA and New York for years, yes, executive protection, and probably Florida, parts of Florida, that was a big deal. Here in Texas, it wasn't. And part of the reason was we would have guys who are extraordinarily wealthy, extraordinarily high profile, and, their comeback to that would be, well, why do I need you? I got my gun in the back of the car, and I'll just shoot that son of a bitch. I don't need you to tell me how to do that, Now, if you've come to Dallas lately, we basically turned into LA and New York combined. There's nobody from Dallas anymore. It's me and 2 other guys, and that's it. You're starting to see, that pick up here quite a bit. And we're starting to see executive protection guys kind of start off and do their own thing now. And that's a unique business in and of itself. A lot of executive protection is done in-house for these larger corporations,
Yeah.
But there is still some outsourcing of that type of stuff. And it's very interesting. It's beginning to merge into its own little sub-industry, frankly, or sub-profession. And the other issue, too, is, in some states, in our New Orleans office, New Orleans just doesn't provide a law, or Louisiana doesn't provide a law that allows for executive protection, basically. And so there's some states that just haven't even addressed the issue. Texas was actually pretty progressive when it did it. So
yeah, wow. Well, that seems like a fairly natural element of the business where you're putting yourself potentially in harm's way. But what I think is interesting is, yes, you are surveilling, yes, you are investigating, but I'm gathering you also do some process serving. And I've never really met anyone who's been happy about being served. And so I'm gathering sometimes there's some hairy situations that you find yourselves in.
Yeah, there is. I mean, my agency really is not doing that much process serving.
Okay.
Most of our guys are, but when they're serving within a case. So they're doing a lot of other work, and they're serving because of one reason or another. They want to interview the individual. But yeah, process servers, if you really look at these guys who are really doing that type of business right now, they're starting off every day with 100 papers to serve. And they're running around town. And a lot of those services are done pretty easily. There are some that do get hairy, but for the most part, and most of them are pretty sharp street guys. I mean, they know, when to knock on the door. They know not to hit the door and look like the police at 3 a.m. They know when to do it as low key as possible. And so I think those guys are doing a pretty good job. I'll tell you that, being in a couple of different states, licensed a couple of different states as a lawyer, Texas, private process server has a definite function in our justice system, because without it, we would just grind to a halt. I'm in a couple of states where, well, like we were just talking about Louisiana, Louisiana really doesn't allow private process server. You have to go through the sheriff, at least for some period of time, and it just slows things down considerably. And it's just, whereas things can happen in Dallas and you can serve somebody and get a hearing in a couple of days. In Louisiana, that may be, good luck.
Take a little longer.
Might take a little, it's going to roll pretty slow. So yeah, they really have their purpose. I mean, they have a little niche in the justice system. And I think that they are themselves kind of represented by their own groups. And, we need them, and we definitely need what they need to do. And yeah, sometimes it's not fun when they give somebody a subpoena or tell them, hey, you've been sued. But, that's life. So.
Do you get a chance to be hands-on much anymore, or are you kind of purely in a managerial type role? Like, do you ever go out and do some surveillance to kind of keep your hand in, or?
Rarely. If I did a surveillance today, I'm almost damn near legal blind at this point, so I'm not sure that I would be the best person. And I know that's, at the age of 18, I probably did more surveillances than most people, 18 to 25 or whatever I did through college there. And I had a lot of fun doing it, and it was a blast. And our guys who are doing it now are younger guys who can, stay up all night and party with people, and that's good for them. Right now, I'm not sure I can make it till 11 o'clock without a caffeine injection, so.
Well, I mean, it's probably a good point to just raise and say, like, what are the physical requirements? Like, if I'm coming out of my government career and I'm in my 50s and I'm in okay shape, could I do this? Or if I've been a desk worker and I'm just jack of it and I want something exciting to do and this sounds like the thing, what kind of physical expectations are investigators expected to have?
Well, part of what I was saying earlier is that we kind of want a ball player who can do a little bit of everything. And part of the reason of that is that we can't have them out there all the time. If you do, you lose perspective pretty quickly. At the same time, if you're a new investigator, we want you on surveillance. And I can't tell you how much you learn from that. If you're in a government surveillance job, if you're working with the FBI or Secret Service or somebody like that, their surveillances are considerably different than ours. A lot of times there's a lot of people there. A lot of times we're a one-man show. Even in a big agency like us, we might send two, but we want to see if that one guy can do it. We want him to act like James Bond there, right? We want him to do everything by himself. And you learn a lot from that. You learn a lot from looking at people. I mean, you learn a lot from watching the habits of a guy. The difference between a young lady who's 27 versus a 65-year-old male banker is different. And until you really do a couple thousand hours worth of surveillance, you begin to see patterns in people. You begin to be able to predict people. I mean, for instance, if our guys are out there watching people in the middle of the night, they lose somebody about 11 o'clock, let's say. They've got about 30 seconds in which they can try to find that person. And if they've lost them, they've got to call into a supervisor who's usually somebody who's a lot more experienced. And, the supervisor's going to say, well, who are you following? Bob. Well, tell me about Bob. Bob's, 50 years old. Okay, well, and where was he driving? Well, he was heading north on the toll road. Well, all right, did you check over here and check over there? Because I know there's a couple of bars that an old 55-year-old guy would like me would like to hang out in. All right, well, let's go check it out. Yeah. So, I mean, you learn from doing it for that period of time just about people generally. And it's critical, I think, as an investigator to make sure that they've got that type of foundation.
Well, it sounds like, too, that extra life experience, if you are coming to it a little later, could be really valuable because you know people better than you do as a young 22, 23-year-old.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and I tell our guys a lot of what we sell, particularly on an agency level, is you sell the experience and the wisdom of the old guys combined with the youth and vigor of the young guys. And, we need the youth and vigor. And so a lot of times if you're trying to get into this business and this profession, if you bring the youth and vigor, that means a lot. Don't discount that. I mean, we need that. So
let me ask you this. What is the best and what is the worst part about investigations and being in that industry?
Well, I'll talk about our shop. I think the best thing about our shop, hands down better than probably almost anybody in the country, is that the variety of things you get to work on. Any day, you never know what you're coming into. You can one day be working on a capital murder case. On Tuesday, you could be working on a commercial litigation where they're fighting each other. Wednesday, you could be doing opposition research on a politician.
Mm-hmm.
Thursday, you could be doing a background check of the next CEO of Exxon. It could be all over the board. A lot of stuff is in the news, and it's fun. If you're working for even if you're working in the large agencies that everybody likes to, the alphabet agencies, the CIA, the FBI, those agencies are highly subdivided, and compartmentalized. And so it's not unusual. Sometimes you'll meet a federal agent who's been in there for 20 years. Well, how many cases have you worked? 6? There were 6 huge mortgage fraud cases, but that's all I did for 20 years. Well, so that's the best thing. The worst thing probably is it is a lot of times adrenaline, and a lot of times adrenaline going 24 hours a day. And the stress of it can get to you. And it does take somebody to be able to push back a little bit and say, I need a break from this. I need a day off. And we really have, you kind of hit the nail on the head. We really have a problem, making sure our people are well rested or well taken care of. And that, and we take every effort to do that, whether it's buying them dinner or having holiday parties or making them go on vacation or whatever. That's a real issue for us.
What, and again, we'll talk kind of general senses, but when someone's looking at a career change, it's good to have an idea of, what the earning potential is in an industry that they might be looking at. So as a fairly new investigator, what are some kind of market rates that they could look at? And does it tend to be a salaried position or is it usually an hourly rate gig?
Yeah. Well, let me say this. You can make as much as you possibly can in this business, just like anything else. Right? Yeah. We have lawyers in this country that are making $20,000 a year. Of course, they're not working too hard. And we've got lawyers making a couple million a year. It depends on the effort that you want to put in. Yeah, most people who are getting out there and starting that are going to be paid hourly wages. I mean, that's just how it is. And that's most of the time because investigators, are living and dying by the work that's coming in. Mm-hmm. You get to the other agencies, what we do offer salaries at our deal. And, they can vary anywhere from about 65 all the way up to 120, depending on your experience. Right now we've got some of the forensic specialists that are out there charging $300, $400, $500 an hour, which is pretty good sized lawyers in some of these larger cities. Now they're highly specialized and they have a lot of background and history. Some of them are where you're just trying to get in to be a basic investigator. Well, you're going to have to take some hourly, wages for a while. And even in our group, we have a group of part-time kind of guys that we try out. And we give an option and give them a chance to try a couple of cases and see how that's going to work over a period of time. We kind of keep that group a little low because we don't like a lot of part-time people, but we do it just to see, some of these people that come in. I can't tell you, I've been doing this for a long time. You can be a PhD and you can be a guy off the street, and I can't tell you if you're going to work out until I see you for about 2 or 3 months. And sometimes a guy on the street will beat the PhD every day of the week. And, it just takes a certain mindset and it takes a certain work ethic and it takes a certain, kind of humility. And there's a combination of all that works really, really well. And so, if you've got that, you've got some past skills, perhaps in some other area, then you've got a real good shot at really making some good money with this type of stuff.
That's fantastic. Well, let's turn a little bit to the business side of things. I think a lot of people see being a CEO as a very glamorous role. If you were going to write a book about being a CEO, what would you call that book?
What would I call it? Strung out. Overwhelmed. I mean, listen, it's like I think every CEO and manager is the same. I mean, you got a million tasks that are in the air at any given time. And it takes somebody unique who can deal with that type of stuff. And I start off the day with about 6 things I know I need to get done. And by the end of the day, I've got about another 20 that have fallen in my lap somewhere. And it's tough work. I mean, anytime you're running a business, it's not easy. And it starts when you wake up until the time you go to bed. And I can't express that enough. I mean, it's full-time all the time. So,
what's that usually look like for you? What time do you usually get up? What time do you usually get off to sleep?
Sure. So, usually I'm up about 6 in the morning.
Mm-hmm.
I got to fly somewhere, and I fly a lot. I travel all over this country and for a lot of different places. So sometimes that's 5 or 5:30 in the morning, and I'm headed to the airport pretty quickly thereafter. And then I'll go until we get to about 5 or 6 o'clock, and I'll usually nowadays get out and get a dinner around 6. But after that, once I get out of dinner, I'm looking back and seeing kind of what's happening. What's happening out there in the field, what's happening in terms of our business during the day. What do we have teed up for tomorrow? And sometimes, there's a lot of times where I don't go to bed till about midnight. And, that's a tough thing. I do, on the weekends, I do work. I try to, I've got kids, so I want to be there for them. So I've got to kind of go around their activities. But it's not unusual for me to get up early on a Sunday morning and try to bang out 3 or 4 hours worth of work real quick that I know that needs to be done prior to Monday morning. And
this is without you even including the time where you got to be out meeting potential clients and lawyers for referrals. And I mean, that's got to be a big piece of it as well.
Oh, it is. Yeah. A lot of times what I'm doing on, you may have that 6 things that you have to do on Monday morning at 8 a.m. And then what happens is you get in at 9 o'clock in the morning, your best client or a new referral comes in and you need to talk to them. It happened to me twice today. And so it derails your day for about an hour to make sure that, they're taken care of, that you understand what they need. And that, you're providing some direction to even the people who are working with you. And I've got, very good people. My people I work with some of the best, I think. And they know what to do 9 times out of 10, but you still have that initial experience where you really need to make sure that your client, I don't care, particularly in this business. And I think law firms are the same way. We may get some clients that call up and talk to some other people, but when your name's on the door, you've got a connection with your client there. And you've got to make sure that you keep that connection with your client. And to make them feel confident in their decision to hire you and what you're doing. So it's you're still doing a lot of hands-on work with each individual coming in.
We talked a little bit about the challenges of managing time and balancing your life so that you don't burn out, so that you take care of the other things in life that matter. What are some of the challenges about leading a team of people that, from what I gather, tend to be extremely driven and are more likely to put their foot all the way down to the floor rather than press the brake? What are some of the challenges in managing a team like that?
Well, I think the first thing you've got to do, as Mike, one of my COOs, says, is we got to get out of these weeds. And that's true. The first thing you can do is teach your people to be leaders and teach them to deal with the business without you. And that's real important to do. And so the first thing, that you've got to let them do is you got to let them run with these cases a little bit. And if things don't go well, you can't fly off the handle. I can't tell you how many times I've seen that. Now, I'll be the first to admit that I was like that when I was younger. If it went bad, I had a temper that was like no other. But I've learned to kind of calm that down a little bit. And if something doesn't go the way I want it to go, don't start cursing right away or burning everything. Just count to 3. So I think that's a big issue too. One of the things I've done, and I continue to do, is I'm in some international associations. And I'm in those because, I do a lot of work internationally and I need to meet those people and those clients, and that's great. But, particularly when they have, a meeting or convention overseas, I'll jump on it. And the reason I do that is because it gives me about a week or so where I'm kind of semi-working, but I'm not really working. I'm not there. And it makes the people in the office basically run the place without me being there. And that's been a real benefit in terms of trying to develop, kind of future leaders that they'll get out and work with it too. So, you've got to kind of, you talk about that driven thing, and you've got to learn to kind of back people off the edge a little bit. But the first thing is you got to back yourself off, because you can get into it as much as they can, and probably more because it's your business. So,
where do you see private investigations going in the next 10 to 15 years? What are some of the big changes that you see? Because certainly one of the things that comes up in a lot of our interviews is the way that technology is starting to interact with the professions that we always thought were always going to be protected and we'd always need a human to do. And you see it in management consulting, you see it in medicine with robotics, you're seeing it increasingly in law. what do you see as some of the changes that are coming down the pipe for PIs?
Well, yeah, I mean, I'll tell you now, it's funny you ask that question. We have a storage facility. If you've ever seen the end of Raiders of the Lost Ark where they put all the, the boxes in that deal, that's what it looks like. It has cases going back to the 60s in there. I'm sure there's somebody dead back there that we've lost for some file clerk from the 80s. But if you look at those old files, it's kind of neat because, when I was a really young guy, you would dictate your report into a little microcassette tape, drop it off. We had two ladies that worked for us, a lady named June who could type about as fast as lightning. And she typed that report up and have it ready for you to go. Of course, we don't do any of that anymore. And if you read some of those files, they would have to take the photographs and take them down to get them developed and then bring them back. And that was a week, And so, technology's making everything a lot more efficient. And that's great. The forensics, particularly with the mobile forensics and stuff like that, that's becoming a big deal. And it's always going to be a big deal. And it's becoming easier. I mean, I actually think beforehand we had few people who were really doing that well. Nowadays, you've got a lot of vendors out there who are doing it. Now, part of what I'm not seeing is necessarily the whole investigative process in that. They're not taking what they find forensically and putting it in with the rest of the process. So we're beginning to see some of that. I do think we are moving towards more of this agency being more dominated by an agency. And I think a lot of that's because some of that stuff I talked about, the millennials here, we're not seeing that many new people start up. We're really losing our new blood. And so it is changing. And I think we're going to see a lot more agencies. I also think we're going to see agencies because I can't tell you of a case I've got right now that's just in New York or just in Dallas or just in New Orleans or Houston or wherever. It's, most of the cases we have witnesses that are all over the country. We've got business entities or activities going on. And so it's requiring, kind of a group of people to get together and try to decipher all this stuff as opposed to just what's happening here in the local office, basically.
And what exactly do you mean by an agency as opposed to, a smaller firm? Like, what's the distinction?
Well, I think we had, particularly in the 90s and 2000s, a lot of people leave law enforcement and there's probably a lot of reasons for that, but we had a lot of people who kind of became a one-man shop. And so they might do a little bit of everything. They might have had some speciality, They might have been, I do mostly work for trial lawyers, plaintiffs lawyers. Or, I do mostly cell phone forensics. Or I do mostly accounting and forensic accounting. But a lot of those guys who did that were guys, again, if you roll back the time period 20 years ago, they started in law enforcement, they retired, and they kind of got involved in it. But I just don't see that as much as I did 10 years ago. And so I kind of worry that this fear of us, the number of us doing this is going to shrink. I think it's still got to be around. I mean, we still have a viable reason to be here and for all sorts of reasons, not just for lawyers, but, for companies and all sorts of things. But I think it's going to look a little different in 10 years. I think it's going to be a smaller group of guys. Yeah.
Fantastic. Well, Wes, this has been fascinating. I know our listeners will have found it interesting, and we're grateful for the time you've carved out for us. If people would like to find out a little bit more about your agency, where should they go? BeardenInvestigations.com. That's our website. Go there. There's all sorts of stuff about us, kind of what we're doing. We generally have a pretty good social media presence. So, please come by and see us and take a look at us. We'd love to see you. If you have any questions, always feel free to give me a call or an email or whatever you need. Because you guys are quite active on LinkedIn as well. Yeah, we have an internal marketing person who is, I think she's a genius. And she's married to a gentleman by the name of Ben Cooper of all names. Not you. Oh, wow. But her husband is crazy. Ben Cooper. So, yes, she does coordinate quite a bit of that for us. Well, fantastic. So thanks again for joining us, Wes. And if you'd like to head on over to theprofessionists.com, you can find all in the show notes, all the details about the Bearden Agency, where you can go and check out their website and find out more about this particular career path. And until next time, we'll find you fit.